weapon inside is safe. To have that sort of line blurred, for me, is something that I think is unusual to compared to maybe a civilian, because there is that complete kind of, there is that complete sort of, it's black and white, secure and not secure, kind of, you see what I mean? So that is, I have noticed that about myself, which is a bit odd, but but yeah, I've explained it to my wife that really, to me, that's not something that I want to happen. I don't want people to just be able to wander into our house, or around our house and start cleaning our windows without me knowing, without them even knocking and saying, oh, I'm going to be cleaning the windows. That, to me, feels really wrong, which, yeah, is probably a bit of an effect. But yeah, apart from that.
It's also interesting the way that you've described making that final 100 meters, with your legs. It's very vivid, your description. Do you think there were others like you walking down that little strip to the end and almost running in their heads, thinking, I really need to get to that point, I have to get to that point?
Yeah, I think so. I think we didn't really, I don't think we really, I mean, I think I might have mentioned it at the time, when once we got in, I sort of said it jokingly to a couple of people, oh, that's what I was thinking on the last bit, but we didn't really, yeah, I think that other people must have been thinking something similar, but the sense of relief when you get to, the end of a tour and you're just waiting for a helicopter to pick you up and just sort of, you're kind of done, you've handed over everything, is really, it creates a really nice atmosphere. I remember there being just this, you get almost this kind of party atmosphere of like, that's it, we're going home, kind of. It was really, I think everyone was in the same boat, feeling real kind of relief, and yeah. So it is a nice, yeah, it's a nice sort of feeling. There was like the tour before that, so we're at Herrick 9, I remember there was a point where we'd handed everything over, but there weren't enough helicopters to get us out sort of quick enough, because they were always busy, the Chinooks, and so they kind of, there was a few days where we were just basically camping out at the edge of this little patrol base, just kind of like not really doing anything, with no responsibility. We weren't patrolling anymore, we weren't doing anything, we were just sort of waiting for a helicopter to pick us up like a bus, basically, and just there was this really nice atmosphere of everyone just being kind of like so, everyone was just so sort of relieved and chilled out. So it does, everything has a kind of equal and opposite effect, with so everyone has experienced that sort of sense of had all that hard work for that long, and then you sort of afterwards feel a bit like, it's kind of almost like a party kind of atmosphere.
I've only experienced it on training exercises with the military, and I can't imagine what that must feel like in an actual conflict area. Because at the same time, I'm thinking that sense of relief. But you're not quite safe, are you?
Yeah, I think at that point, there was, in that particular scenario, there was very little kind of, I mean, obviously, there was a small chance that, we could get some indirect fire into the camp or something, but but that's, the risk becomes minimal at that point. It was patrolling, it was patrolling outside of the base there was the real kind of, that's when you felt, like something really could happen. I think psychologically as well, one of the interesting things that I noticed is that soldiers also really want to do their job. So it sounds kind of counterintuitive, but there was a point where there is a massive relief that people feel when they actually get to fire their weapon in anger, sort of, if you like. When people get to fire their weapon for real towards the enemy, but there is actually a massive sense of relief and a big buzz that people get from that, because, which sounds strange, but it's, I think, because the way I describe it is like a soldier's like a coiled spring. So they spend, depending on how their career's gone, you know, they could spend years and years and years practicing things over and over again, and they get coiled up basically like a, you know, like a spring, and they're doing drills over and over again to sort of practice what they would do in different scenarios, and you know, and on exercises, just mentally rehearsing things. And then when it actually happens for real, people really do get a big buzz out of it. And I remember when there was a point where we had quite a big contact, and I'd been firing the GPMG, the general purpose machine gun, and from a Wimmick, so like a Land Rover basically, in the front of one of those, and we got back into camp, or into the sort of little patrol base we were living in, and me and this other guy were just sort of grinning at each other, just like, you know, and we couldn't stop grinning about it, because we were just like this, because there weren't any, you know, there hadn't been any casualties, there hadn't been any, nothing had, you know, nothing sort of, nothing negative had happened. We just felt like we had this massive sense of relief, you know, like we've actually, you know, like we've done it, sort of thing. Because there's just a big sort of, I don't know, there's like a sort of, I don't know, just a sense that, you know, you've worked towards something for a very long time, and then so when you actually get to do it, there's something quite good about that. And I actually feel that there's, psychologically, there might actually be more of an impact sometimes on someone who's been to that point, you know, where they've been in danger and things through the military, but actually if they haven't had a point where they've actually been able to fire a weapon, they haven't felt like they've actually had any kind of like, you know, maybe any kind of outcome, that might actually probably be worse in a strange way.
It's a good point, I think, now to look at your journey and how you got to Afghanistan. You know, why did you decide to go into the military, and did you expect to be in that position ever?
I think at the point I decided to join the army, I didn't expect to be in Afghanistan, because it was, I'm trying to remember sort of how it worked, because obviously it was after 9/11, it was during the, you know, it was there were troops in Afghanistan at that point, but I think what had happened was Afghanistan had very much disappeared from the media, because there was an initial thing of, oh, we're going to send troops to Afghanistan after 9/11, and then most of what the UK was dealing with was the north, where things were very stable and not actually, there wasn't much going on. And I didn't, you know, I mean, I thought the way I explained it to my mum was joining the army would be mostly about peacekeeping, and, you know, and being kind of, you know, and that's sort of what people felt like that was what the army was for. In that sort of time, you know, early sort of, really early 2000s. And then I did, my first tour of Afghanistan was actually in the north, in Mazar-i-Sharif, or near Mazar-i-Sharif, where it was basically, there was no, yeah, there was very little actually happening to speak of. There were a few incidents that happened, but I wasn't directly involved, and it was over a 6-month period. There was sort of 2 kind of major incidents for an entire battalion. It was very quiet. And then at the end of that tour, we actually went down to Lashkar Gah, where in Helmand province, where the British Army were going to be, you know, taking over from the Americans effectively. And we did our last month there in this very strange scenario where we knew it was a, you know, we knew it was going to be very different down there from what it had been up north, because you know, we'd effectively been just patrolling around with our berets on, not even wearing helmets, not even, you know, just with body armour and your